Okay, welcome to lesson 2 of 4. As I said in the last one, initially I was going to record this in 2 parts, but I'm going to do it in 4 parts just to make it a little bit, accessible so it doesn't feel overwhelming. Hopefully the audio isn't too bad. It's raining outside, so there might be a little bit of background noise. But let's get ahead. So yesterday in the last video that I made, we looked at the subjective frame, which is thinking about artwork from a personal response perspective, both as a viewer, thinking about your personal response as an art maker and the experiences, memories, feelings that you embed within your work and how you represent that. And also when responding to work, thinking about the kind of emotional connections that you make to the work, or what the artist has embedded in there that you might relate or respond to. Today we're going to look at the cultural frame. So the cultural frame, it's a really nice picture, by the way. The cultural frame is used to interpret ways that meaning in art is shaped by culture, essentially. So this one's really thinking about context and different types of contexts that influence work. So we're looking at things like social norms, social situations, social issues, communities, and cultural issues. So when we're looking through this lens, we're really considering the broader context in which the work has been created and what different influences from the world at large can be perceived in the work. Through the cultural frame, we understand art as a way to explore and represent social, economic, and political issues. So we're looking really at how an artist is representing the issues that surround them in the world or issues that affect them as a person. And we're also looking at how those issues that might pertain to you as the viewer shape your interpretation or your response to the work. So some of the things that you might like to think about or different kinds of sub-lenses that you can consider through the cultural frame include class and representations of class, race, ethnicity, gender, technology, which is a really good way to look at Patricia Piccinini's work, politics, religion, science, globalization, the environment, climate change, and economics. So if we tie the cultural frame to the conceptual framework, then if we look at, first of all, the artwork, I'm going out of order here, but if we look at the artwork, which is at the center of our massive Venn diagram, then through the cultural frame, artworks are reflections of social, community, and cultural interests. So, we might consider what kind of reflection are we seeing? What kind of social construct are we seeing represented? What kind of community are we seeing represented? What kind of cultural elements are we seeing represented? If we consider the artist through the cultural frame, then obviously an artist is influenced by their own cultural identity, or they might be influenced by experiences with particular social or cultural groups. Now, this can include subcultures. So you could be part of, you can have a cultural identity, but you could have a subcultural identity as well. So an example of that might be you identify with goths or you identify with LGBT community. So, you're thinking about subsets of culture as well, not just culture in terms of ethnicity. When we look at the audience through the cultural frame, audiences can understand art through their own cultural and social identities, and they may belong to particular social groups or communities. And this can affect the reading that you have of art, especially, if art is made for a specific audience or made by someone of a specific cultural group, then someone else of that same group is going to have a different connection to that work than someone who doesn't. And a really good way of looking at this is to compare Western art to Eastern art and to consider how different symbolic elements have different meanings across those different cultures. And because, if you look at artwork made by someone in the East and you might consider how they use colour symbolically. Those colours have very different meanings in Western culture. So that's a good one when looking at your case study artist as well, looking at some of the colours that he uses. And I think you'd written about that in your essay about how red was the colour of luck and fortune, and whereas in Australia and in Western society, red is often a colour of strength, power, sometimes of love, sometimes of anger. If we consider the world through the cultural frame, the world is understood through individual and community experiences of social issues. So we're looking at what those social issues are and how each person might respond to and understand those. If you're looking at an artwork through the cultural frame, here are some of the questions you can ask. Again, I'm going to start with artwork. But we might ask, how does this artwork reflect, examine, or explore social, community, and or cultural interests? We can also ask what kind of comment it's making. Not all art tries to make commentary, but we might consider, is this art making a comment? And what is the comment it's making? Or how is it representing this issue or idea? We can ask what features of the artwork, including signs and symbols, refer to cultural knowledge or social issues. So what is the artist embedded in the work that relates back to that culture? And this is obviously going to be a really easy one for you, because if you consider the work that you've been working on, your small bust, and you've been deliberately embedding elements of culture into that, your own culture, it's really easy to see the different symbols that you've used and what they represent. If we look at the artist through the cultural frame, we can ask, is the artist representing a particular social or cultural group, and how is this communicated? And how has the artist explored a specific perspective, point of view, or cultural knowledge in their art making? I feel like that's pretty self-explanatory. If we look at the audience through the cultural frame, we might think about what social and cultural perspectives they bring to their understanding of the artwork, and does their own cultural identity enhance their understanding or interpretation, or does it make it, is it a barrier to their understanding? And we consider, could the artwork be interpreted differently by audiences from different backgrounds? And I think when we're talking about cultural representation, then the answer to that is going to be yes, but we might consider how. And it's really important then to go, well, who is the art audience for this work? Where has it been exhibited or displayed? Who is viewing it? Who is talking about it? And then how are they responding to it? If we look at the world through the cultural frame, how have social, community, or cultural issues been represented? So are they represented to be confronting? Are they represented to be challenging, thought-provoking? Is the audience asked to think about this issue, or are they being challenged by this issue, confronted by this issue? Are they being asked to experience empathy? So that's really important. Like, obviously there's an interlink there with audience and world, but we're looking at how is it represented, and then how that representation encourages an audience response. We're also going to think, how has the artist been influenced by their understanding of the world and their experience of the world as well? And you can really see, like, I think it's starting to become really clear how much of this stuff overlaps, that you can't separate them out. Like, if you're looking at an artwork through the conceptual framework, you're also looking at that artwork using these different frames as well. I'm going to take a look at an example, and it was the one on the cover slide. This is by Lorraine Connolly Northey. It's called Three Rivers Country 2010, and it's a mixed media sculptural piece made of corrugated iron, tin, mesh, and wire, and it measures 3.6 meters by just over 8 meters, so it's pretty large. I actually really love this. I think it's really beautiful. I'm going to give you a bit of information about the work. There is a video where Lorraine talks about the work. I'll post a link to that video up in the top of the screen and in the description below. So after I go through the next slide, pause the video, go and watch that video, and then come back to this one. Also, print a copy of this See me if you need me to print it for you, but print a copy of this and pop it into your visual diary. When you're responding to these artworks and doing these tasks, you should have a copy of the artwork there to reference. Make sure you're including citation, so the artist's name, the name of the work, the date, and materials. If you can't print the work, a sketch is fine, but if you can print it, that's good. So about this work, Wiradjuri country in central New South Wales is vast, with hills in the east, river floodplains and grasslands in the interior, and Mallee to the west. It is known as Three Rivers Country, as the Murrumbidgee, Kalari, and Womble rivers course through it, teeming with life. But as the colonial frontier spread west from Bathurst in the early 1800s, the Three Rivers country was surveyed and cleared, dissected and demarcated, and kilometres of fencing spread through the Wiradjuri land like cracks through ice. In this work, the snaking rivers dominate, shifting from rusted ripple iron and the delicate open weave of agricultural fencing to the familiar lacework of rabbit-proof wire. Tying these forms together are coulamons, oval-shaped bowls that form both the riverbanks and the great cultivated plains of the interior. This text is taken from MCA Sydney. This is a really interesting statement about this work, and I want you just to think about for a second the use of materiality here. And so when you look at this artwork, obviously it's very symbolic, and I think you can very clearly identify that it is to do with colonization and the dissection and erasure of culture. But I think it's really important to look at the materials that Lorraine has used and the meaning in those materials and what they represent. And that is, as a concept, is materiality. It is where the materials that you use have meaning embedded in them. And so that's why they're the perfect material to use for a specific statement that's being made. Okay, the next slide is the video. I can't play it here for copyright reasons, but I will post a link up above. So please go and watch that video of Lorraine talking about her work and then come back to do the next task. Hey, didn't I just mention this? Materiality. So materiality can connect concept with the art making practice. When you watch the video of the artist discussing her practice, I want you to think about what kind of materials does she use? How does she use them? What connection do these materials have to the places and objects she represents in her artworks? So the first thing I'd like you to do, it's not written here, but the first thing I'd like you to do is just list the materials that she's described. And you can go back to the statement 2 slides ago to write them down. And I want you to think about why she chose each of those. So just write it down and dot point next to it. Why would she have chosen that material? And this is going to really rely on your understanding of colonial and post-colonial Australia and colonisation, which I'm hoping you do have an understanding of because you should have been studying that in English. But the next step is I would like you to write a description of Three Rivers Country that explains how Lorraine Connolly-Northey has used found materials to represent ideas about place. Think about why she has used barbed wire, fencing mesh, and sheet metal, and what each material might symbolise about Wiradjuri country and how it has changed over time. Now, in terms of a description, I'm looking for about a paragraph, not a full essay. So just really thinking about her use of materials and the meaning associated with them. Here's another example. So here's an artwork called Still Life Number 30. Really creative title. This is by Tom Wesselman, and it was painted in 1963. And I think if you're familiar with art movements of the 60s, where we're looking at modernism and then kind of moving towards pop art, I think you can clearly see that influence in this work. This work is oil, enamel, and acrylic paint on board with collage and found objects, so mixed media. It's about 1.2 metres by 1.6 metres. And 10 centimetres deep, which means that some of those collage materials must have dimension to them. So here's a statement from the era. Plenty of pop artists took on food as subject matter. Andy Warhol focused on Campbell's soup cans, Roy Lichtenstein the hot dog, and James Rosenquist spaghetti. Around this time, the American dining industry was coming into its own, and food production was getting faster. Canning lines shifted into high gear, bringing off-season edibles to be sold at any number of big chain supermarkets. In sum, American food became just more than just apple pie. It put on a suit and tie and was transformed into a business. Now, this is a statement about the commercialization of food. And if you know anything about sort of the 1950s and 60s, it was a massive era in industrial growth and the production of mass-produced food. So things like TV dinners and frozen foods and canned foods were starting to become more readily available, and the 1950s gave birth to the supermarket. So what we see in the 1960s is artists responding to this cultural change that happened, and obviously America a driving force with sort of things like industrial change in Western society. So we're going to think about that work through the cultural frame. And the first thing I want you to do is get a copy of that work. You can Google it by title and print it, or you can ask me to print it for you, or you can do a sketch in your book. And I want you to, it's actually going to be really helpful if you can pull it up on your computer and zoom in on it as well. I want you to make a list of all of the food products that you can identify. It says 4 artworks, but that's a mistake. Just in that one artwork. Make a list of all of the food products you can identify in the artwork. Do you notice more fresh food or processed food? And then a short statement, a sentence or two. What can we learn about time and place? The time and place that these artworks were made. So what do you think food trends were like in the USA in the 1950s and 60s? And what does this tell us about the kind of lifestyle that people were living? Then there's one more task with this one. There's 2 images here. So grab a copy of the second one here, which is also called Still Life, because apparently artists can't come up with better titles for their still lifes. This is Still Life made by Jacopo da Empoli. I probably butchered that. It was painted in 1625. That's a heckin' old painting. And I want you to do a compare-contrast. So a Venn diagram is fine. I want you to look at these 2 images, and I want you to identify what kind of food is represented in this work. And you've already identified the food represented in the previous work. And I want you to identify, what does this tell us about how people's relationship with food has changed over that period of 300 years. So what is the difference that we're seeing? And that is all. Once you have completed these tasks, can you please come and show them to me? We are currently sitting at the end of week 4, so I would expect that you would have completed these ones by either the end of week 5 or the start of week 6. If you are not present, you can always take a photo or a scan of your pages and you can email them directly to me. And if you have any questions or anything you're unsure about, or just anything that you kind of want to know more about, please come and let me know. Thank you very much.